Welcome back to the History Argument. Today we are going to be discussing the Schlieffen Plan and Plan 17. I'm the Brigadier General.
And I'm the Raving Raven.
So we're going to be trying out something a little different today. We're going to give you guys a short explanation and then a longer explanation of both of the plans. So those of you that are just watching this for a 5-minute video can get on out of here after the short explanation. And those of you that want to go more in depth can stick around till the end. So here, in short, here's the Schlieffen Plan. The Schlieffen Plan was a plan that revolved around enveloping the French armies. The idea of the plan was to go through Belgium and trap the French armies, which would be fighting along the Franco-German border, and surround them. There would be 7/8 of the troops in the enveloping armies going through Belgium, and then a smaller amount of troops along the French and German border to hold the French back and concentrate their numbers there so the Germans could surround them and essentially slaughter the French armies and knock France out of the war. Now, Plan 17.
Yeah, now Plan 17 was a bit smaller in scope. Really what it consisted of was concentration of troops. That's the big thing in places like Alsace-Lorraine, where the French wanted to retake after the Franco-Prussian War and their loss. It was still bitter. And also concentration of troops on the Belgian border to a somewhat lesser extent to ensure Belgian stability and to keep Germany from doing essentially what the Schlieffen Plan would attempt to do, from sweeping in and surrounding from the back. So really the plan was to sweep through Belgium, up and across, and to ensure that Germany could not open up really a second front.
Yep, and so to conclude the short version, the main reasons that these plans failed and neither one could overcome the other and the war resulted in trench warfare was because they didn't account for delays, and the German plan was very scheduled. The trains would almost hit each other going through the train stations, as they had to cart troops and supplies off very quickly to supply the huge plan. And they were based on outdated tactics. These plans would have worked if they were fighting on an 19th century battlefield with muskets that were not as great. And they didn't account for modern weaponry such as machine guns and the large armies that were seen due to militarization during the beginning or before the First World War. And they inaccurately predicted the enemy position. The French did not think that the Germans would be coming through Belgium with as many troops as they did, and this allowed their positions to be overrun in the first couple of months of the war. And they didn't plan for things that would happen in war. Like, the Germans never would have thought that the French would have destroyed their railways and thus cut off German troops beyond the destroyed rail lines from supplies. So that's the short version. Now let's dive in and do a little bit in depth. If you're in it for the short version, thanks for listening in. You may now go do other things. So the Schlieffen Plan was the brainchild of Alfred von Schlieffen, and this guy died before his plan. He could see his plan in action, and this guy Moltke took over, and he became the new father of the plan. And he began to divert troops away from enveloping the French in Belgium and to the Franco-German border, because he was worried that the French would be able to just smash through the small contingent of troops on the Franco-German border and end the war by reaching Berlin, and that would not be good. So he significantly weakened the right flank. Also, just an interesting numbers equation. So the rightmost group had about 125 infantry divisions, and that would amount to, not in today's divisions, but back in 1914, that would have amounted to 1.5 million troops on the right flank. And in the center, he would have had 168,000, and on the left, he would have had 224 100,000 troops. So there was a significantly larger contingent on the Belgian border, which were set to envelop the French armies. And so, yeah, like I said, railways were very crucial to the Schlieffen Plan, and after the French destroyed them, their supply lines began to stretch like a rubber band and eventually snapped somewhere around Paris. And so Belgian resistance was also stronger than they expected. Many Germans joked that the Belgians had a chocolate army and therefore would not provide any resistance to their armies marching through their lands. The Germans even offered Belgium to like not destroy anything if they allowed them to just use Belgium as a road for their armies to attack the French. The Belgians, of course, said no, and very fierce fighting broke out among Belgian and German troops. And another problem was that after German forces were significantly depleted charging Belgian forts around Liège, the German reserves weren't well trained enough to replace the soldiers that they had lost. And so these reserves began to desert and leave the battlefield essentially, and this significantly weakened the plan. And the threat from Russia to the east was very bad because Germany did not want to fight a two-front war. The whole point of the Schlieffen Plan was to eliminate the French and be able to go and attack Russia and not be fighting a two-front war. So the Crown Prince of Bavaria, Rupert, was in command of 250,000 troops along the Franco-German border. And he was told by German High Command to take his troops and go and defend against the Russians on the Eastern Front. And he refused because he wanted to defend Bavaria, which is an area around Alsace-Lorraine. So the Germans had to divert troops from Belgium, which they couldn't get them to the Eastern Front as fast as they would have hoped. Rupert's troops were very close to railways and could have been transported to Russia much easier, and this weakened the armies along the Belgian border. And so that pretty much sums it up for the Schlieffen Plan. Let's talk about Plan 17.
Yes, now Plan 17 was an amalgamation of plans stemming from the French loss in the Franco-Prussian War years earlier. And so really it was made up of tactics from all the way back in the 1870s running up through the early 1900s. So what you had was multiple separate plans, essentially, that had been altered and redesigned over the years in small parts, making additions and subtractions of troop numbers, altering it for technology changes and stuff. Now, when Joseph Joffre became effective head of the French military, in the lead up to World War I, he decided he would rewrite Plan 17 to make it more cohesive and to focus on concentration points for troops. So large amounts of troops were concentrated in the area in Alsace-Lorraine to reclaim what the French had lost in the Franco-Prussian War and to defend against any German advances in the area as inevitably they would come. So that would eventually stagnate. What the Plan 17 wanted to happen would be a fairly quick and efficient advance to take all of Alsace-Lorraine and then to hold the line essentially against the Germans, advance further if need be. But this would run into many problems along the way. Disorganization, bad communication, bad intelligence, and it would lead to stagnation and battles that would last for almost a year, like Verdun, the longest battle of the war. And that entire front would devolve into trench warfare. Now, with the Belgian-French border, the French were, rightfully so, concerned about a German advance into France, going for Paris to knock France out of war, which was exactly what they were planning. So France wanted their forts there to be fully operational with as many men as they needed. They did not devote as much importance to the Belgian border as they did to Alsace-Lorraine. This would come back to hurt them when the German advance was not easily stopped and really only ground to a halt once the British arrived. No thanks to the fighting skill of the commanders in charge, as they did not know what to expect, what they were dealing with. And Plan 17, if it had worked as it was envisioned to, they would have pushed the Germans back in Belgium all the way back to the German border into Germany. But it was not as expansive as the German vision. The French goal was not to knock out Germany out of the war so they could fight another front. No, the French goal was to reclaim land that they had lost, perhaps gain some more land, and ensure their power and status in Western Europe. So Plan 17 was not as ambitious, but no less flawed than the Schlieffen Plan.
Yeah, so now I guess we're going to debate both of the plans, the Schlieffen Plan and Plan 17, deciding essentially which one could have succeeded purely based on our speculation. So in my opinion, I believe that the Schlieffen Plan could have succeeded far more easily than Plan 17. The whole idea with Plan 17 was to quickly take Alsace-Lorraine and inspire the French populace with a boost of patriotism and show them success, arousing a massive morale boost in the troops that were going to envelop the German armies going through Belgium. And one of the most important parts of the plan was to wait until Britain got involved in the war. And as we covered in earlier videos, Britain did not get involved in the war until it was absolutely necessary. The Prime Minister did not want to plunge into a bloody war. And so the German plan was actually decent. It relatively predicted where the French armies would be, and if they had been able to break through Belgian lines faster and easier, they would have been able to envelop the French armies and, I think, eventually lead to sure defeat. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, well, my view on this is I agree. The Schlieffen Plan was bolder and more mobile, and I think had a better chance of success, but we have to evaluate the goals of each country here. Germany's goal was to totally knock France out of the war so it could deal with Russia. So the Schlieffen Plan was supposed to be faster and more efficient. The French plan was more a war for certain pieces of territory, to defend their border with Belgium and to retake the places of Alsace-Lorraine. It was a far less, it was not a large view of the war. It was a much smaller goal, which I believe would have been achievable if this was back in the 1800s. Same thing with the Schlieffen Plan. I believe both of these plans are rooted in tactics that were fundamentally flawed and outdated. Obviously, no one could have predicted that. I do agree that the Schlieffen Plan, I think, had a better chance of success in that it could knock out France out of the war, but Plan 17, in achieving its goal, in theory, was not a bad idea. However, it came with a severe underestimation of German numbers in Alsace-Lorraine, and how many troops they would have to devote to the Belgian front, where the Belgians were fighting. However, I don't think either plan in this scenario had any good chance of success, as they simply were not equipped with the knowledge of what this war would have been. Back in the 1800s, it may have been possible. In the 1910s, absolutely not.
Yeah, so that brings us to our final talking point, the problems with both plans. And these plans really led to the disaster that is trench warfare and the slaughter of the First World War. They didn't account for any delays. The Schlieffen Plan depended on railways in France and in Belgium, and when the French began to destroy these railways, they had no way to move supplies to their troops. And it was like a rubber band. They were kept stretching closer and closer to Paris, but their supply lines couldn't take it anymore, and eventually they had to fall back. And both were based on outdated tactics, as we've continually said. They would have succeeded, most likely, and they were more accurate to an older type of war in the 1800s. And they didn't account for modern weaponry. And this is one of the biggest things, they inaccurately predicted the enemy position. The French way underestimated German numbers coming through Belgium and expected the majority of the fighting to be along the Franco-German border. And they didn't plan for things that happen in war. Another destruction of railways was a big one that caused the Schlieffen plan to fail. So anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Fundamentally, neither plan was viable in this particular time period. The Germans underestimated not only the French positions, but also the Belgians' determination and military prowess. It also didn't really factor in what type of effect the British, who were the only professionally trained army in the war, would have on the front in Belgium. And you are right, they were not able to sustain supply lines. With Plan 17, supply lines weren't as much of a worry, as it was a much smaller area, planned far lesser in scope. But it too suffered from disorganization and mismanagement in every step of the way, really, especially in the Alsace-Lorraine, leading to extremely long battles, like I said previously, like Verdun, which lasted just under a year and had almost a third of French troops cycled through it at some point. It really created the ultimate factory of death up until that point, because of the stagnation. Nobody could have expected how immobile this war would be.
All right, so I guess that wraps up the history argument for today. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.